Spooky Attic. Today, I am going to tell you a ghost story about renting an apartment. The protagonist of this story is named Xiao Yuan. Xiao Yuan is a freelance illustrator. To find a quiet and cheap creative environment, he moved into an old apartment building on the edge of the city. The building had seen better days, with a mottled red brick exterior. The hallways always carried a mixed smell of dampness and dust. His apartment was on the top floor, the fourth floor. Just above him was a public attic that had never been opened. The landlady was an older woman. When they spoke, her eyes seemed to dart around. Xiao Yuan thought she was just wary of a new tenant and even explained his profession. When she handed over the keys, the landlady said vaguely, "The top floor is quiet. Just don't pay too much mind to any noises from upstairs. Old buildings, you know, they always make sounds." Xiao Yuan didn't think much of it at the time, just taking it as a routine reminder. When he first moved in, everything seemed normal. Xiao Yuan savored the novelty of the new environment and the freedom of living alone. He liked the light on the top floor. The afternoon sun, warm as it streamed through the old wooden windows onto the floor, chased away the old building's chill. He worked, ate, and slept. Life was regular and peaceful. About a week later, subtle abnormalities began to appear. At first, it was sounds. Late at night, when the whole city was asleep and only the sound of his keyboard kept Xiao Yuan company, he would occasionally hear faint noises from upstairs. It sounded like someone walking lightly on the wooden floor in soft, soled shoes. Or maybe like something being dragged, making a faint scraping sound. Must be rats, Xiao Yuan reassured himself. It's an old building, after all. He even bought some sticky traps and placed them near the ceiling access panel, but he caught nothing. Next, small objects began to move. He clearly remembered arranging his brushes neatly in the holder before going out. But when he returned, one had fallen onto the desk. He thought he just misremembered. The spice jars in the kitchen, which he always kept in a specific order, would have the salt and sugar switched by the next morning. He started to wonder if he was just overworked and his memory was failing him. If any of these things had happened in isolation, anyone would have written them off as coincidence or carelessness. But when they happened one after another, an unspeakable unease began to grow in Xiao Yuan's heart. But what truly made his blood run cold was the whispering. It happened one rainy night. The rain lashed against the glass, creating a constant noise. Xiao Yuan was rushing to finish a deadline, his concentration total. Just then, he vaguely heard an extremely soft, faint sound. It seemed to be right by his ear, yet it also seemed to come from the ceiling above. The sound was intermittent, like someone speaking in a breathy voice, but he couldn't make out any specific words. Xiao Yuan abruptly stopped his pen, holding his breath. The rain was loud, but he was certain he hadn't misheard. The whisper was like a delicate thread, stubbornly weaving its way into his ears during the gaps in the rain. He stood up, walked to the center of the room, and looked up at the ceiling. The old ceiling fan swayed slightly with the weak electrical current, casting a dim, yellowish halo. The ceiling was dead silent, apart from the sound of rain hitting the roof. Nothing else. Is it the wind? He asked himself, but he knew in his heart it was completely different from the wind. He walked to the door leading to the hallway and hesitated before opening it. Only the sound. Activated light switched on, its cold light illuminating the dust-covered stair railing and the darkness of the floors below. The small wooden door leading to the attic was tightly locked. It was covered in a thick layer of dust, clearly untouched for a long time. He closed the door and leaned his back against the cold wood, his heart pounding. The whispering seemed to have stopped. Was it a hallucination? He began to seriously doubt his own mental state. Had the continuous all-nighters and the stress of living alone caused him to develop an auditory illusion? But the whispering didn't disappear. It always showed up unexpectedly, especially late at night or in the early morning hours when the surroundings were quietest. Sometimes in the bedroom, sometimes in the living room. But the source always seemed to be vaguely pointing toward the ceiling, toward that sealed-off attic. He began to suffer from insomnia. Lying in bed, any slight sound made him tense up. The creaking of the floorboards, the sound of water in the pipes, the occasional noise from a neighbor's television. All these sounds, which had seemed perfectly normal before, now felt like omens. And the whispering, like a persistent ghost, would always emerge just as he was about to fall asleep or quietly in the space between dreaming and waking. He even tried to record it with his phone, hoping to capture some evidence. But when he played the recordings back, there was nothing but his own nervous breathing and ambient noise. This terrified him even more. Was it possible that only he could hear this sound? Xiao Yuan became increasingly gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes, his spirits low. He started paying attention to the other residents in the building, hoping to glean some information about the attic from them. He worked up the courage to knock on the door of an old gentleman on the 3rd floor. The old man seemed kind, but when Xiao Yuan asked about the attic, his expression clearly changed. He just waved his hand and said, "Don't ask questions, just live your life." This cryptic reaction only deepened Xiao Yuan's suspicion and fear. What exactly was in that attic? One afternoon, Xiao Yuan ran into the landlady while picking up a package downstairs. He hesitated, but finally went up to her. "Ma'am, I wanted to ask, the attic in our building, what was it used for before? Why is it kept locked?" The landlady's cloudy eyes flickered. "That was many years ago," she sighed, her voice low. "Someone used to live in the attic. A little girl. Later, something happened. No one has gone up there since." Xiao Yuan quickly pressed, "What happened?" "Something bad," the landlady said, evasively, her gaze drifting away. "The little girl lived there alone. Later, she was just gone. They say she couldn't overcome her troubles." She paused, her tone taking on a note of warning. "Stop asking. Don't go near it. Those sounds from upstairs. Just pretend you don't hear them." After speaking, the landlady shuffled away, ignoring Xiao Yuan. The landlady's words threw open the floodgates of Xiao Yuan's fear. All his previous anxieties and guesses seemed to find a terrifying source. That whispering voice. Could it be that little girl's? He returned to his apartment and sat by the window, watching the sky gradually darken. A chill rose from the soles of his feet and spread through his entire body. He was now utterly convinced that what he was hearing was not a hallucination. There was a restless spirit in that attic. Fear ignited an almost morbid curiosity in Xiao Yuan. He wanted to know the girl's story. He wanted to know what the whispers were trying to say. He started searching online for old news about the apartment building, but information was scarce. Meanwhile, the activity from the attic seemed to be getting more obvious. Besides the whispers, he began to hear other, more distinct sounds, like the sound of a marble rolling, startlingly clear in the dead of night, and what sounded like a child humming a note of tune song, faint and ethereal. One night, he woke up freezing, only to find his bedroom window open. Cold night air was pouring in, making the curtains dance wildly. He clearly remembered shutting it before bed. He felt like he was being slowly eroded, surrounded by some invisible force. His rational mind told him to move out immediately to get as far away from this damned place as possible. But deep down, another voice was urging him on. Go see. Go take a look in the attic. Maybe the long-term mental torment had made him unstable. Or maybe the whispering self held some kind of bewitching power. Xiao Yuan became obsessed with figuring out how to get into that attic. He studied the small wooden door many times. The lock was an old-fashioned padlock, looking very solid. He didn't have a key, and he didn't dare ask the landlady for one. He thought about picking it, but was afraid of making too much noise. His chance came one weekend. A pipe had burst downstairs, and most of the residents had temporarily left. The building became unusually quiet. The landlady, also going to stay with relatives, had temporarily piled some junk in the hallway. Among it was an old toolbox. Xiao Yuan's heart hammered. He knew this was his only chance. Night fell, and the building was terrifyingly silent. Xiao Yuan quietly slipped out of his apartment and went to the attic staircase. The sound, activated light, didn't turn on. The area was pitch black, save for the faint glow of his phone screen. He found a long, thin piece of wire and a small hammer in the toolbox. He took a deep breath and stood before the attic door. The smell of dust was strong. By the light of his phone, he inserted the wire into the keyhole and fumbled with it clumsily. His hands wouldn't stop shaking, and sweat soaked his back. The only sounds in the hallway were his own heavy breathing and the faint scraping of the wire against the lock tumblers. Time ticked by. Every second felt like an eternity, just as he was about to give up. The lock was open. Xiao Yuan's heart leaped into his throat. He gently removed the padlock, hesitated, and then slowly pushed open the long sealed wooden door. A gust of air hit him, a strange smell mixed with dust, mold, and an indescribable hint of rot. It made him cough. Behind the door was a narrow, steep wooden staircase leading up into endless darkness. He turned on his phone's flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, illuminating steps covered in cobwebs and dust. He went up, step by step, cautiously. The wooden stairs issued a heavy groan under his weight, painfully loud in the dead silence. With every step he took, The air felt colder, heavier. The faint whispering sound also seemed to grow clearer, hovering right by his ear, as if guiding him, or perhaps warning him. Finally, he stepped onto the attic floor. It was a low, ceilinged space. 2 small skylights were set into the slanted roof, but they were so caked with grime. They let in almost no light. The flashlight beam swept across, illuminating the scene. The attic was piled high with junk. The air was thick with suffocating dust. Scattered in a corner were items that clearly belonged to a child. A rag doll missing one arm, a few fairy tale books with yellowed covers, and a small wooden rocking horse standing silently, its seat coated in dust. The light continued to move, finally stopping on a wall. On the wall, drawn in crayon, were crooked pictures, mostly simple houses, suns, and flowers, and a little girl in a dress, standing alone in the center of the frame, her face smileless. Xiao Yuan's gaze was drawn to a small wooden box in the corner. It wasn't locked. He walked over, squatted down, and gently opened it. Inside were some letters and a small diary. The letters were addressed to Dearest Xiaoya. The senders appeared to be her parents, but there were very few letters and the dates were far apart. The diary's pages were yellowed and brittle. The handwriting was childish, intermittently recording a child's loneliness and longing.
Mommy and Daddy didn't come to see me again today. It's so noisy downstairs. I want to go down and play, but the door is locked. The attic is so dark. There are strange noises at night. I am scared. I drew pictures, but there's no one to see them. Today, I heard that voice again. It's calling my name. It said it can play with me.
The last few pages of the diary were scrawled and messy. Some parts smeared so badly they were illegible. The very last entry had only one word, written over and over.
Cold.
Xiao Yuan felt an icy chill shoot straight up his spine to the top of his head. The hand holding the diary began to tremble uncontrollably. That whisper, it wasn't Xiaoya's. It was something that had been keeping her company. Just then, he heard the voice. This time, it wasn't a vague whisper. It was a clear, ice cold little girl's voice, speaking right behind him.
You found me.
All the blood in Xiao Yuan's body seemed to freeze solid. He stood rigid, unable to move. The phone slipped from his trembling hand, hitting the floor with a thud. The screen shattered, and the light went out. The attic was plunged into complete darkness. He could feel something right behind him. He could smell that strange, faint, cold fragrance mixed with dust and decay. He could hear the extremely faint sound of fabric rustling.
Are you cold too?
The voice spoke again, closer this time, as if breathing right into his ear. Fear was an invisible net, paralyzing him. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. He wanted to scream, but couldn't make a sound. He wanted to run, but his legs felt heavy as lead. The rocking horse, in the complete darkness and stillness, began to rock gently on its own. The slow, rhythmic sound echoed in the dead, silent attic, hammering on Xiaoyuan's already shattered nerves. He didn't know how long he stood frozen in the dark. All he could do was squeeze his eyes shut and pray none of this was real. The creaking of the rocking horse and the icy presence seemed to slowly recede. The suffocating silence returned. Trembling, Xiaoyuan fumbled for the dead phone on the floor. He didn't dare look back. He practically scrambled down that narrow, steep staircase, fleeing the attic that had terrified him to his very soul. He burst back into his apartment, slammed the door, and locked it. He slid weakly to the floor, his back against the door, gasping for breath. Cold sweat soaked his clothes. His heart was pounding so hard, it felt like it would burst from his chest. He never heard the whispering again, but the experience in the attic was like an indelible brand, seared into his mind. The next morning, before the sun was even up, Xiaoyuan packed a few essential things and fled. He didn't notify the landlady. He didn't ask for his deposit back. He just wanted to get away as fast as possible, as far as possible. He never went back. Afterward, he would sometimes wake up from nightmares. The dream was always the same: the dark attic, the rocking horse moving on its own, and that cold voice whispering in his ear.
Are you cold too?
He never found out what the little girl, Xiaoya, really went through, nor what the voice that kept her company was. He only knew that some places and some secrets are best left sealed forever, and some whispers are best left unheard. Stories done. Good night. Here we share ghost stories, supernatural tales, and horror stories. If you enjoy it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thanks. See you in the next story.